All right, so what I want to talk about today is something that if you've been doing this for a while, you already know, but if you're a beginner to intermediate, it's going to be helpful to really solidify this concept in your mind. And that is the concept of progressive overload. And really, progressive overload is, in my opinion, the only way to really make long-term gains. You know, oftentimes when I have a new client, they will say, well, what about this intensity technique like drop sets? Or what about this exercise? Superset! So what about this or that they maybe read about or hear about that they think will cause more progress or more muscle growth or strength gains, any of that. And the way I say to look at it is, look, is that drop set going to get you stronger over time? So if you're doing 135 for 10 on bench press, if you do a bunch of drop sets, is that going to get you to, let's say, 155 for 10 faster? Or is another method going to get you there faster? Whatever method is going to put on that strength for reps faster is likely going to put on the muscle much faster than, let's say, some intensity technique. Now, as the name implies, progressive overload literally just means doing more progressively. Over time, you're doing more to continue to create a stimulus for growth, or really for change in the body in general. You know, this would apply to getting a tan. If you're out in the sun, you would be out in the sun for longer periods of time. And in the case that we're talking about here, you would be in the gym lifting heavier weights. And there are a lot of different ways to have the progressive overload. If you're a beginner, you could adapt to that stimulus for a while. You could have one workout and be adapting to that and making progress for the next week or 2 weeks. You can actually keep the weight the same for a while in the very beginner stages and still make progress and grow. At a really advanced stage, though, that's not going to be the case, and you're going to have to come up with different periodization models to progress, and that progress that you make might only last for, let's say, a day. Now, as far as how you can go about progressing, I think a lot of us know this. You can add reps. So in the example before of 135 for 10, the next week you try to get 11 or 12. You could add weight and go up to, let's say, 140 for 10. You could decrease your rest periods. So if you are doing 3 sets, and before you did, let's say, 3 sets of 10 with 135, and you did it with 2 minutes of rest, you could cut that rest down to, let's say, a minute and then 50 seconds, and then eventually get it down to 90 seconds and continue to go down that way until you're doing more work in a given period of time. So in that case, you're increasing the density of the workout. And actually, I think there was a guy, Charles Stanley, who was known for EDT, escalated density training. But again, it was escalated density training. So over time, you were doing more and more in a given time period. Of course, you could just add more sets, and all of these, when you think about it, are methods of adding volume. Technically, if you are adding a rep, you are adding volume. If you're adding weight, you are adding volume. If you're taking away rest periods, you are doing more volume in a given period of time. And of course, adding a set would be more volume itself. Now, when it comes to intensity techniques, I think they can be used. If you do a drop set, you are now doing more volume for the muscle. You know, that would apply even if you decided to do partials at the end or something like that. It's just not what I would recommend long term, because you don't want to think, how can I overload in this one workout? You want to think, how can I overload over the long period? Now, you'll notice that I've been talking about adding weight here and getting stronger and what can get you to this higher weight faster. And the reason is because most of the evidence shows that if you are not getting stronger, you're probably not gaining a lot of muscle. And now I don't mean stronger necessarily as a 1 rep max. In fact, I would say that if your goal is hypertrophy, you really shouldn't be focusing just on a 1 rep max. If you want to do that for fun or for powerlifting, I think that's great. But really, when you look at it, the person who can take their bench, again, from 135 for 10 up to 225 for 10 is absolutely going to have bigger pecs, bigger shoulders, bigger triceps. All of that musculature is going to be very much more developed. And you're just not going to have somebody make massive strength gains without somewhat equivalent size gains for that person. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have somebody who is smaller than another person, but stronger. In fact, I was a good example of that in college, where I was 170 pounds and I was deadlifting 405 for 12 reps. But I had friends who were a lot bigger than me who weren't deadlifting even in like the mid threes. Now, part of that is because they weren't doing it very often, but that's also kind of the point, is that strength is based on neurological factors, technique, muscle. There's a lot of things that go into strength beyond just muscle size. But for a given individual, generally speaking, there's going to be a good correlation between strength and size. And it took me a little while to realize that when I was first getting started with this. And somewhere in mid-high school, I realized, I've only ever gotten bigger when I've gotten stronger. You know, if my arms were 14 inches at the time and I was doing whatever weight on curls, and then I look back a year later, if they hadn't grown, well, no surprise, my curls also hadn't gone up. But when my curls had gone up, you know, let's say 10 pounds on the dumbbells, my arms were bigger. An important thing to note here, though, is that I'm talking about, of course, with consistent form, okay? If you start jerking the weight, getting a spotter to help you on bench, changing things up like that, and cheating, then you absolutely can add more weight without actually adding muscle. So you'll see this a lot of times. People will start a routine and they'll have all their form, you know, for all the exercises really pristine. And then as the weeks go on, they find that they're slowly changing their form to the point that after a couple of months, they're cheating on everything and they wonder why they haven't made a lot of progress. So I actually don't think it's a problem to cheat a little bit in your form. I think momentum on some exercises, let's say a barbell row, I think you can have a little give there, but it has to be consistent over time. Otherwise, you're not really able to gauge your progress accurately. Now, I do want to point out that the increased strength is more a demonstration of the progress than it is a requirement to progress. So what I mean by that is you could do a workout that causes muscle growth, and then that muscle growth, it will result in increased strength. And so you're able to demonstrate that strength. Let's say you did a high rep, high volume workout. You don't typically think of that as a strength training workout, you know, especially when you start talking about blood flow restriction and really higher reps. But that might cause hypertrophy, and because you've increased the cross-sectional area of the muscle fibers, you are now stronger. It's not necessarily that you had to lift heavy in order to get that progress, but getting that progress will allow you to lift heavier. In the beginner stages, like I was mentioning, you can adapt for a very long time to minimal changes in stimulus. So you can just follow a basic linear periodization model. This would also apply if you've had a deload, you've been away from the gym for a while. You really don't have to get too fancy with the methods. You can just slowly add weight week to week. When you're more advanced, you do have to get into more advanced periodization. You will only be adapting to the stimulus. You might not even be adapting to a stimulus on a week-to-week basis, but really you're setting up entire macro cycles in order to create a stimulus that you will adapt to, even if it's just a slight adaptation. But ultimately, the concept still remains that you need to have this progressive overload over time to stimulate your body to change. One last point I wanted to make that I've had a few questions on is, what do you do when you're dieting? Because obviously we always want to gain strength, but can we really be expected to gain strength when we're in a deficit? Now, if you are an enhanced athlete or you are new to this, then yes, you probably can gain strength while you're dieting. But for most people, if they're not using substances or they have been doing this for a long time, it's not very realistic to gain strength during a dieting period. And at best, you're trying to maintain. So that doesn't mean you should not try in the gym and just accept that you're going to lose strength. But the point is, you're not necessarily going to have progressive overload in terms of the weights and total volume that you're doing. In fact, you might actually want to back that off during a cutting period because you're not going to be able to recover as much. And it's been shown pretty well at this point that you can cut volume pretty dramatically and still maintain your muscle, which is good during a period of time like this because you're going to be tired and you're not necessarily going to want to do those same grueling workouts. So if you can cut volume in half and focus on recovery, that's a benefit. But you will still, and we talked about this before, with having any changes in your body, you will still have to provide progressive overload in other ways. In order to keep losing fat, you're going to have to lower the calories over time. Your body's going to have adaptations to that by lowering NEAT, for people who don't know, that's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Your metabolism can slow, your hunger can increase. There's a lot of adaptations that can occur so that you will have to keep dropping calories, keep increasing activity in order to make the changes that you want during a fat loss phase. So I just wanted to bring this up because I do get questions about it a lot, and I think we all inherently know it. Even if you haven't really studied the science behind this endeavor, you kind of know that over time you're going to have to do more. You see the biggest guys in the gym, and oftentimes they are the strongest guys. So you know that you hope to get to that strength level in order to get that size level, you know. But I still think it's a good reminder because oftentimes we do see articles or people talking about these crazy intensity techniques, and I'm not trying to put those techniques down. I do think there's definitely a place for them. However, if you don't have these core concepts then you're really not going to get anywhere. It's like the people who focus on what supplements they should have instead of focusing on, what their actual diet and training is like. In this case, looking at the training, if you're not even focusing on progressive overload with the right exercises, then it really doesn't matter about your tempo or even your frequency or your training split, because this core concept really is the base for all progress going forward. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any comments, leave them down below. Any other questions, I'm happy to answer.